Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Float, Odyssey, Telegram, Twitch, and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is July 14th, 2022, and this is episode 139 of the Workshop Podcast. Tonight, in a minute, you'll get to see where I got my good looks from. I got my dad coming on. He flew all the way across from Nova Scotia to Alberta. His arms got kind of sore, but it was nice to pick him up at the airport. So real quick, we're going to bring him on in a couple minutes to chat about growing up in the 50s and 60s on a farm and in rural Nova Scotia. But before we do, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Number one, we now have our very first official sponsor. I'm really excited. U.S.A GPS tracking. So if you're looking for any items, I'm going to be doing some serious testing on this stuff. I'm going to be using it for tracking my generator in an instance where maybe it was stolen, some of my trucks, all of that kind of stuff. So if you're just interested in checking the stuff out at this point, use the discount code TOOLMAN, TOOLMAN, and you get 10% off for now. Going forward as well, we are going to be launching the Snail Creek Homestead. We are going to be launching the Workshop Patch of the Month Club. There's going to be some extra discounts, including even a steeper discount for subscribers to that club. Hang in there and we'll find out some more details as we go along. Tomorrow night, we're going to have a special Friday night interview. That way I can take Saturday and Sunday off, go to the city and hang out with my family. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to have Andy Higginbottom. I really hope, Andy, I pronounced your last name right. And if I didn't, I apologize. He's going to be coming on talking about open source software and digital freedom. I'm rather excited. Drop by, give it a chance. He is passionate about all things digital. He's going to talk to us about setting up password managers, setting up all of the necessary safeguards we need for our digital lifestyle. I'm rather excited. It's going to be a great conversation. He was one of the guys that did all the cooking at the LFTN Spring Workshop, and we had a little bit of time to chat, but nowhere near enough time because there's never enough time to talk to good people. So we're going to bring him on here so he can have an hour and a half of uninterrupted time to share what he's passionate about. All right, and today's tool. This one was recent, but for some reason, I've been having to use it quite a bit lately, and that is fluid film. Had to use it on a truck door the other day. So if you guys are looking for a lubricant that works and just works really well, check out fluid film. The link's in the description tonight. Right now, there's a 3-pack on sale for $30. It is the cat's ass when it comes to lubrication, and it just works. And if you want to support the workshop and the content that I create, that is the quickest way to do it. So without further ado, we have, Little Klondike Outdoors said they ordered the crescent wrenches today. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate that. We've been seeing big bumps in that income, and it's a huge help because you guys know that part of my vision for this is to be at least half of my income. I'm going to shoot big here, and eventually it's going to be my full-time income, and I love creating content for you guys. So without further ado, let's introduce my papa. How are you, Dad?
Oh, great.
Good,
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
You ever been on an internet podcast radio show before?
Never.
Never.
A little bit nervous. But...
Oh my goodness. Yes. No, that'll be all right. I told him, guys, that might be a little bit nervous, but he is always, the one thing Dad can do is talk to anyone, even people that don't want to listen to you, right, Dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we brought Mom and Dad, my twins, Alice and Charlotte. They flew out to Nova Scotia to visit with you guys for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
You guys had a good time?
Oh, yeah. Great time.
What all did you do?
Well, on the weekends, the girls went out to my daughter's trailer out there, and they did a little swimming and got on a tube behind the boat and swimming and a little bit everything like that. And
one of your granddaughters just said, Gracie just come up and said, "You're doing great, Papa." She put that up on the screen. So
thank you, Gracie.
You're doing pretty good. But yeah, and so you are, how old are you, Dad?
67.
67. Yeah. And you did a lot of flying in your life before this week, didn't you?
No.
Boat zero, right?
Yeah. First time.
The closest you went to flying was falling out of bed, right?
Yeah.
So Dad should be an inspiration to everybody. 67 years old, and he got on an airplane for the first time. Never been outside of the Maritime provinces, right, Dad?
No.
Nope. And him and Mom got on the plane and came out here to hang out with his grandkids and his son-in-law, or his son and his daughter-in-law. And we've had a pretty good time. Ate a little bit, haven't we?
Yeah, a little too much probably. But
went to the Fireside Grill last night.
Oh, it was awesome.
Anybody local in the province of Alberta that wants a good meal, go to the Fireside Grill in Czar. That's CZAR. What an incredible restaurant he has there, doesn't he? Oh, man. Yeah. So we brought you on. You know, a lot of people, it's a little bit of selfishness on my part because I love hearing your stories about when you were a kid, you know, but I know a ton of people in our community love to hear about simpler times. We all kind of dream about it, you know, and I mean, some things were better, some things weren't, but
yeah.
So you were born in what year?
1954.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So you would remember a bit of the 50s and definitely remember the 60s, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I had a friend years ago who used to say if you remembered the 60s, you weren't there, but you were too young to to do that kind of stuff, weren't you?
Yeah, at that time. Yeah.
So where were you born?
Well, a little community called Easton.
Yeah.
It's in Digby County in Nova Scotia. Way back in the sticks, we were at the very end of the road, and grew up in a large family of 9 children. And our first house we had up until I was 7 years old. It was pretty rough, I would say. No insulation. Of course, a lot of the houses maybe back then probably were that way. And in the wintertime, upstairs when you're sleeping, it would get pretty chilly. You could see frost on the end of the nails that were coming through. And when you see that, you know, it's chilly.
So how many kids did you have how many kids did your parents have when you were living in the tiny little house in Easton?
Actually, we only had 7 at that time.
Only 7 kids, yeah.
2 more born later after we moved.
Nana and Grampy Cook and 7 kids.
Yes.
And how many, I never asked you this before, but how many bedrooms did you have?
Technically. Well, actually, my parents had 1 bedroom on the ground level in that old house, and the upstairs was just wide open.
What?
So
really? I
just
didn't know
a partition, and we'd pull an old blanket or something up between for a little privacy.
And you had running water?
No.
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 You had to run to get water, didn't you?
Yeah, no plumbing. No, we had what I called the outdoor plumbing. We had the little building down the field.
So you had an outhouse?
Yeah.
What was your favorite type of toilet paper?
Well, the newspaper is better than the Eaton's or Sears catalog.
You guys always and you really did. You used the Sears catalog, didn't you? Yeah. Whatever you had, you had to make do.
Yes.
Yeah. And for water, Dad, what did you do for water?
We shared a well with a neighbor way up across the road, and we had to carry that in buckets and bring it back home. And of course, we only had a wood stove, so if you needed hot water to bath or for tea or whatever, we had to heat it on the old wood stove. And
how did the well work?
So
it was a dug well for those.
Yeah, it was an old dug well, rocked up. And
how deep?
Oh my, that I'm not sure of.
Maybe 10 or 20 feet, maybe. Wouldn't be much more, would it, for a dug well?
No. Yeah.
And you had a little crank arm, one of those?
Yeah. It had a wooden big spindle like in the middle, and it had a crank arm on it and like a chain, I believe, that was attached to it. And we'd lower a bucket down in the water and let it sit there for a few seconds. It would tip over and fill up, and then you'd crank it back up. And it's a little different than what we're all used to today. But
so then you'd haul the water back.
Yeah,
that'd be child labor, wasn't it?
Oh yes, yeah. And sometimes their father or mother would do it too. But we heated on the old wood stove, and of course, when mother, there was no washing machines or anything like that. So her method of washing was a big wash tub, we called it, in the middle of the kitchen floor. She had a little stand-up board with a rough type of thick glass on it with 2 wooden legs that would hold it up, and she'd scrub her clothes up and down on that and hang them outside on the clothesline. And it was pretty rough. And of course, Saturday night was bath night. We'd all take turns. And
so you didn't bath every night?
No, not back then.
So did you put fresh water in for every bath?
Not necessarily.
No. So did you use the same tub that she washed the clothes in to bath in, or was it a different tub?
That
I'm not sure.
Not
that's
really
okay.
Sure.
Yeah. And didn't you say, go ahead, have a drink there, Dad? And then so she used a scrub board to scrub the clothes and hang them out on the line. And then didn't you say you got a great big upgrade in the washing facilities at one point?
We did. We upgraded to one of those really fancy wringer washers, and you'd feed the clothes through it. It was electric, and it had two wringers that would squeeze clothes really tight, and then they would come out the other side. They'd swish around, wash around, and when they come out, then you still had to hang them on the line because there was no such things as dryers back then. But
my friends Corey and Brian Alexovich, they're getting ready to move into their RV full time, and they do a similar process. She has a wringer. They call it a wringer washer. Is that what it is? Yeah, and it clamps onto the tailgate of their truck, and they can. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Man. Yeah, so they park there, and they do their. But it works for them. Saves them having to do a lot of extra electricity and stuff. And so, before we moved to where you moved, there was one thing that happened. So we talk about how things were slightly different back in the before times, right? So let's tell the story about Aunt Judy. That would be your younger sister, right?
Yes.
So at the time you would have been at the most 7, right?
Yeah, very most, 7.
And she would have been 5?
Yeah, 4 or 5.
And she wanted to make some clothes for her doll, right? So what happened?
Well, Judy had quite a large piece of cloth, and she wanted to make some kind of a piece of clothing for her little baby doll. And so she thought it was too big. So my father always kept an old chopping block and an axe out in the yard and used that to chop the wood. And so she said, well, you're bigger than me. You could probably swing an axe. Why don't you cut this piece of cloth in half for me? So I said, okay. So she laid it down on the chopping block and stepped back. And I brought the axe up. And of course, just about the time the axe was coming down, too late to stop, she changed her mind and decided she didn't want me to cut this cloth in half anymore. So she reached to grab it, and I sliced totally through her thumb.
And she still doesn't have a thumb, right? I mean, it never, not that it grew back, but
it looks a little different.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was just hanging by a piece of skin on the bottom, and so they had to take her out to Weymouth to the doctor, and no freezing or anything. He just put some kind of a splint on it, shoved it back together, and she was hollering. Imagine.
You quite a big school you went to too back there, was it?
Well, one-room schoolhouse. Everyone from grade primary up through grade 6 went to that one-room schoolhouse. I had a sister that was about 3 years older than me, and of course we were in the same class, so you had to kind of behave yourself that way, because with your sisters in the same class, they could go home and tell on you. But anyway, it was different. And an old wood stove in the middle of it to keep it warm. And the teacher would go around, help from desk to desk, individual. And of course, must have been quite a chore because they had so many different grades to do. But it was a little different than what you're used to today, for sure.
And then, so at 7, you guys, Gramps, your dad made a big move, hey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where did you go? So talk about, you guys packed up and moved?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We were so excited about that because we'd actually gone up. We moved up to a place on Digby Neck in Rossway. But beforehand, I'm thinking maybe about a month before, we'd get up and kind of peeked in the windows and looked it over. And we were so excited the day we got to move. And so father got an old truck, and of course I was young. I wasn't really helping at that time, and I had my younger brother in an old baby carriage, and we were running up and down the road all excited because we were moving to this, what we kind of considered a mansion at that time compared to what we had. And so anyway, eventually we got everything on the truck, and my father said, I believe we're all set. We got everything on there. And so he nailed the old door shut, and we went up to Digby Neck. And I'm not sure if it was on the way that my father realized it or after we got there. He realized that he left his rabbit hound behind. And so
where was he?
He was nailed up inside the
house. so in all the hustle and bustle?
Yeah. So anyway, we continued on the way. We arrived up there, and I think we had no telephone, of course, to call, but there was neighbors down where we had moved from. They had a phone, and I think he went to another neighbor up next door to where we moved to our new home, and he called down to, I believe it might have been his brother-in-law, and he asked him if he would go undo the door and bring our dog up to us. So we eventually got our rabbit hound back, but that was quite an interesting ordeal that day.
So you guys went from a reasonable size house that apparently is now either a farm, a woodshed, or possibly gone.
Yeah.
And the house you got, pretty big, was it?
Yes, a very big house, 2-story. We had all good, beautiful gravity feed water. We was kind of at the bottom of a mountain, so the spring was up a ways, and it would gravity feed water would go all the way upstairs, and it was great. And we had what we couldn't believe was a real bathroom, a great big old tub to
We had an actual bathtub.
Yeah, we had a tub, but at first, we had to get the water and that going and everything after we got there, and had a real toilet and sink and a real tub, and we thought that was incredible. So,
and how many acres did you get with it?
Oh my goodness, we had a great big hayfield. It was roughly 25 acres. And we had a big woodlot up on the mountainside, I believe was about 50 acres. And there was a big garage and 2 or 3 small buildings there for the animals.
There a barn? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and a big barn. And to our surprise, the barn had electricity.
Oh.
So we thought that was incredible. So anyway, and if I remember right, that was in 1962, and if I can remember my father's story, I believe we paid the grand total of $2,500 for it at that time.
So you got 75 acres, a house, a ton of outbuildings for $2,500.
Yeah, I believe that's
pretty good.
Price, yeah.
So, and then you guys, let's talk a little bit about the work you did as kids.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, you had to cut firewood, but I always loved hearing about pulpwood. So what did you guys do? How did that work?
Well, the way it kind of worked in those days was the mother stayed home and she looked after all the cooking and cleaning and all that. And the father would take care of the finances and bring in the money. And he was a very hard worker. My father did several things. We had a small family farm, probably 2 pigs and probably about a dozen or so chickens. So we had our own eggs and our chicken and a couple pigs and so on. And anyway, that was our job. We had to help do the barn chores, like we had to clean out behind the cows, and we had a little one big plank that with a ring in it, and we had a tool that we could lift that up with and shovel all the crap and stuff in there and clean out behind there. And we'd put straw or hay in underneath of them for bedding and all that. And of course, our father cut pulpwood too, and for a lot of you that don't know maybe exactly what that is, you would have to cut down, like it would be mostly spruce or fir, and it would you could only peel it in the summertime from roughly about mid-May till mid-August. So they were cut in 3.5-foot lengths. That was our father did that. And then we would come behind them, the kids, and we were old enough to go to school. We had to go in the woods and help peel pulpwood to help make a living. And we would take an axe and take probably a 2-inch strip down the side of it. And then we'd lay the block down, stick the axe in the end of it. And we had what we called a spudding iron. And we'd use that tool to rip the bark off of the wood. And we'd go that way all day until supper time. So it was pretty hard work that we had to do.
So he would take, what you're telling me is he would take kids with him in the woods and give them axes and sharp implements and allow you to work all day in the hot wood. Yeah. You never got arrested for child endangerment or anything like that?
No, I guess that was probably the normal thing at that time. But
so did Gramps use the pulpwood? Was that a big part of his income at the time, or what?
Why did he? For sure. Yeah, that. And then eventually he got a part-time job like driving the school bus. I think he did that for about a total of 10 or 11 years, and he did that plus keep the farm going and cut the pulpwood. So it was quite a big job to do.
You guys, he didn't need to make a ton of money either, though, because most of what you guys needed you had on the farm, did you?
For the most part, yeah. We had all of our meat. I mean, with the chickens and the pigs and the cows and so on, we had that. We would grow a large garden, so we had pretty well all of our own vegetables and everything. But it was a big job because we had to put all the hay in too and do all that. And that was all done loose with horses and so on back then.
So how did that, because I mean, the experience I had with hay when I was a kid was square bales, and now it's round bales with tractors. So
yes.
how talk about the hay process, because you fed that to the cows for sure, and pigs too at all, or would they eat it, or no, just the cows, right?
Yeah.
So how did you cut, what all went into that? Because I'm sure it was work.
Well, we had a great neighbor lived next door, and he was an elderly gentleman, and he had a horse. My father had a horse. And we'd put them together and make them a pair, and we would cut all of their neighbors' hay, and we'd cut our hay. We did it all together.
Yep.
And he had what they called a mowing machine, and it had a long blade on it, and the teeth would go back and forth. They'd harness the horse up to that, and he'd go around. He would cut down only enough for the hay at a time for what he knew we could put in one day.
Okay.
So he would leave it roughly 2 days laying there just as it dropped and let it partially dry. And then then he had another machine that we would harness one horse up and hook the raker machine to that. And he'd go all over the field and he'd rake it all up in big rows. And then my father, his job was when we'd take the wagon down with the horses, we'd pair them up. It took 2 horses to pull the wagon. And then we'd go down, and our neighbor was the older fellow, so he would stay up on top of the wagon.
Okay.
My father would pitch all the hay up to him, and the kids, there'd be a couple of us. Our job was we were up there, and we had to, of course, walk all over it. We called it tramping it down.
Tramping the hay down?
Yeah, because you had to get it so it pack in so you could get more on the load. And then once that got full enough, they would tell us when we were going, we'd take off, we'd sit on the load of hay, and then we'd go haul it all the way up, and then the horses would back it into the barn, into the area, what we call the thrashing floor. And on both sides of the barn, on either side of the thrashing floor, he had a mow. And it was a pretty neat apparatus that they had back in that day, how we get it from the wagon up into the mow. We had in our barn, we had a big steel track up in the ceiling that ran all the way across the barn. And in the other fellow's barn, he had a wooden track.
Okay.
It basically worked the same way. And what they would do, we had a big U-shaped, big, large fork. And then my father's job was he would take that, drive it down into the hay, and he had a little handle that he'd pull up, and that would lock. A couple little tines would come across the bottom of it and lock it into place so the hay wouldn't fall off as it went up. And then the other fellow would take the horse, and he was attached to that, and he would walk it hid, and it was geared up to a little pulley apparatus and down close to the floor. And as the horse would walk up the side of the road, that would pull the hay up in the ceiling. When it would hit the track, it would go over to one side on the mow, and when it got over there, it hit a trip rope attached to the hay fork, and my father would pull the big trip rope, and down the big load of hay would come, and we would be in the mow. And
that was your job?
Yeah, our job again was to tramp the hay down, and it was probably like 120 degrees up there. You'd sweat bullets up there in the mow, and we'd walk over that till our legs almost dropped off. They'd feel like they were going to. But anyway, it was quite a process. But.
So a buddy of mine, Snail Creek Homestead, he's a fellow YouTuber. I met him at LFTN. He's going to be on the show down the road. He has a question for you. He wants to know, what is pulpwood used for? I should have asked you that. So you bought it and you peeled it, but number one, why did you peel it, and what do they use pulpwood for?
Yeah, I think mostly it was used for paper, I believe. Yeah, and I think some people would probably use it for post, but mostly for paper, I believe, and they process it. Yeah.
And it was the reason you guys peeled it was you got more money for it peeled, right?
Oh, quite absolutely, yes, yeah. It would sell it by the cord, and they would give you a lot more. I mean, you could sell it what we called rough wood. That was with the bark on it. So if you cut it after August, see, the sap would dry up in it. So if you cut it after August, you couldn't peel it. So you had to sell it for what they called rough wood, which they would give you a lot less money for.
Did Gramps haul those logs to the mill, or did somebody else come and pick them up for him, or do you remember?
Yeah. We had an old ton truck, and we'd load all this 3.5 foot pulpwood on there, and one it had sideboards, and he'd put 2 tier on there. We'd put it on and loaded one up towards the headboard and load that one up. When that got full, then we had another one on the back end so we'd have to climb up and kind of handle it twice to get the first tier in, and then the second tier you could just do it right from the ground.
So it basically, pulpwood would go to the mill, and they'd turn it into the wood pulp, and then turn it into paper or whatever, right? Yeah. Okay. And one thing I was going to get you to talk about, and I always loved, Dad always told this story, or told a lot about. So whom I called Grampy would be his father. My kids call him Great Grampy. His name was Roy. Talk about how, when he would cut wood, how efficient he would be. Things he would do to make his life a little easier that not everybody did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, when he cut pulpwood, I remember this one time he was telling me about being in with another group of guys. They were cutting for a bunch of guys at that time. And the guys would always say to him, "How do you get such a quick start? Like, you always seem to get ahead of us. Every day in the morning you get ahead." And he didn't tell him the secret. But anyway, he told me that what he would always make sure at the last end of the day before he quit, he would knock down probably 8 or 10 trees at least, but he'd just drop them and leave them there for the next morning. And then before he quit to go home that night, he would fuel up the saw, put in the gas, and he would put in the chain oil, and he would file up the saw and have it sharp, ready to go in the morning. So when the other guys would come in the morning, they would have to file their saw and fuel it up and so on. And he would go in and turn his on, crank her up, and off he goes. So by the time they got going, he would probably have 3 or 4 trees all cut up. So he always seemed like he had to jump on the other guys, and they couldn't figure out what he was doing right.
And he just do just a little bit of work at night would set him up. And you always said too, didn't you find that a little bit of work at night, and if you're ready to go first thing in the morning, you seem to just be so much more efficient, don't you, and get things done?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So what about animals? What all kind of animals did you have on the farm back in the day?
Well, we had probably always a pig or 2, and we had probably, I'd say, at least a dozen chickens and rooster or more, and probably half a dozen cows for milk and for meat. And we even had, at one point, we called them turkey ducks.
Oh,
yeah, they were, I guess, a cross between a turkey and a duck, and they were a strange bird. They'd go around, and some people was kind of afraid of them because they were friendly, but they just seemed like they were always chasing you. They would follow your feet around wherever you go, but not everyone liked them. But they were kind of a weird animal, and they always had their head bobbing when they walked, and they looked kind of weird.
Mom never liked them, did she? My mom, your wife?
No, she had a bad experience with one. She was terrified of them, and of course, they wanted to come over and spend time with you. And of course, if you ran, then of course they try to catch you. And
thought it was a game.
I think we were engaged to be married, and anyway, my wife, or my girlfriend at that time, she was down to visit us, and of course she was terrified. She started to run towards the house, and of course the turkey duck took after her. And anyway, she went in the door, but she was too scared to close the door. And when she went in, the turkey duck landed right in on the floor right behind her. So I had to get it and take it outside. She was pretty terrified of that. That was quite an experience.
One thing I always liked, I don't know why I was always intrigued with it, but the turnip grinders that you used. Well, I mean, I guess it goes without saying, but what was a turnip grinder? What did you use it for? Because it sounds like something you don't even hear of today, right?
Yeah, well, I guess, that would be pretty rare if you've seen one today. It was a big machine. We used it to grind up turnips, because we used to, once they come through the turnip, they would be like thin slices, and we would feed them to the cows. And even sometimes we'd give the horse a little bit. And so anyway, it had a large hopper on it. It would probably, I guess, hold maybe a half a bag of turnips to a time. You dump them in this big hopper, and it had a round wheel on it with blades on it, and a big handle that you would crank by hand. So you would crank the handle up, and as the wheel went around, it would slice off the turnip, and you catch it in a container underneath. And we'd feed it to the cows. So
I always liked that.
yeah.
This isn't your story, but I think you got to tell this story. So a friend of yours or a guy you knew talked his sister into doing something there one time?
Yeah, some people, animal lovers, may not appreciate.
That's okay. They'll appreciate the story.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he was quite a bit older than I am. He told me some stories about some things he did. He was quite a bad lad when he was growing up. And he said, of course, he lived on a farm as I did, and they had a turnip grinder there too. And anyway, he said he decided one day that he would get this turnip grinder spinning really fast. He didn't have any turnips in it at that time, it was empty, but he got the handle going. And he had a younger sister who really didn't know any better, I guess. And he told her to pick up one of the chickens that was running around the yard and toss her in there. So he did. And he said all he heard was one squawk and all kinds of feathers going in the air. So
and that was it.
Yeah, so he said he got introduced to his father's belt that evening.
Oh, yeah. Punishment was it usually a switch, wasn't it?
Yeah, sometimes a switch, sometimes a belt. That was
for those who don't know what a switch is. What's a switch, Dad?
Well, I guess it would be like you could take a skinny little limb off a tree or the top of a bush that was really flimsy, and it stung. I'll tell you when you met up with that.
And if you were in trouble, didn't you have to go out and pick your own switch? Is that right? Or
yeah, sometimes he would say, you'd either say you cut your own switch, or he'd say, you stay here, I'll be right back. You knew what was coming.
So when I moved to Alberta, and I used to tell them that one of the things that we hunted out east was rabbits. Mm-hmm. Most of them look like we had two heads because everything's so plentiful out here. But rabbits, talk about, I love hearing of, anyway. So you guys would eat rabbit?
Oh yeah, that was that saved us a lot of money growing up, because again, when you grow up in a large family, you don't have a lot of money. We did have all kinds of vegetables, of course, because we grew our own gardens. So you had to think of ways to come up with some cheap meals to feed a large family of 9. So anyway, we had a couple rabbit hounds usually. And so we would go hunt rabbits, and we'd take the dogs and we'd bring them home. And of course, that was our cheap meal. Our mother, beautiful cook. She could cook anything. And we'd bring home the rabbits and clean them all up. And of course, having all of our own vegetables. And she would cook a beautiful rabbit stew and put the big chunks of dough on top of it. And
she called them doughboys, right?
Yeah, we called them doughboys.
Some of you guys would know them as dumplings, but yeah.
And it was incredible, the flavor.
So what would go in the rabbit stew?
Well,
obviously rabbits.
Yeah, rabbit. Yeah, yeah, and water, of course, a little bit. And she always put a chunk of butter in to start with, and she would kind of brown up the rabbit a bit first before she put anything else, and then there'd be some water go in later. Turnip, carrots, potatoes, and
parsnips.
Yes, yeah, a little bit of parsnip for that little zip. It just seemed to make it taste so much better.
And the occasional bit of not buckshot, but whatever it would have been. I don't know. Would you guys usually hunt deer
you call it buckshot.
Yeah.
We used number 4 shot a lot, either 20 gauge or 12 gauge.
So talk about the rabbit hunting process. You took me a couple times when I was a kid, and I always remember it was awfully cold.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting process. If you were in a kind of fairly open area, so you could see all right, we'd be on the ground, and of course you'd listen. The dogs would get all excited when they would get smell a rabbit, and we'd see a track, and we'd point them towards it, and they would go, and first thing they'd start off barking a little bit, and then when they got close, they would bark like crazy, and the rabbits would run, and they tend to circle. So if they got quite a ways away, you could hear the dog. Of course, the bark would be faint. And then we'd move in a little closer, and then they would, as they made their circle coming back, you'd try to watch when they go by, and then, of course, you'd shoot them. And if we were in like a really thick area where it was lots of briars and bushes where you just couldn't see, well, if you were on the ground, a lot of times the rabbit would be past you before you could see it. So we come up with the ingenious idea of the cooks of the odd spruce tree would be there, so we would know where each other was. If there was 2 of us hunting, me, my father, or a brother, we knew where each other was. We'd each one decide we'd go up in one of the spruce trees so we could see each other from where we were. And it was incredible because we could see so far. We were up above all the underbrush, and we'd watch, and you could get the rabbit pretty slick like that. You could see him coming from a long ways.
You imagine either of us climbing a tree today and holding a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge, and we'd need a deer stand or something, wouldn't we?
It's a challenge to climb the stairs for me now.
So, Little Klondike says it's amazing how you never felt like you did without. Hey, you never felt like you were without anything, did you?
No, we had everything we needed. We had just a wonderful family and great parents who taught us the value of hard work. And I've tried to pass that value on to my kids, and I think they're doing quite well for themselves. And my son and daughter work very hard, and we're proud of both of them. And so I think hard work, I don't think ever hurt anyone.
Never.
No, I think it's healthy for you.
So what about other meals? Hash. You always talked about hash. For those of you guys, not drugs, but what is hash, Dad?
Well, it includes potatoes, but I mean, you can add
everything
other
you
stuff
ate had
to
potatoes, didn't it?
Potato is the main ingredient for hash, but sometimes my mother would make hash, and it would be pretty incredible, the flavor. You'd look in the fridge and say, "Oh, Mom, what are we going to have for supper? I just don't see anything." And she could grab a little of this and a little of that. She might have leftover peas or turnip or whatever, and some potato, and throw it all together. And it was just incredible what she would make out of that.
So that would for like a lot of times it'd be reheated potatoes, and you'd fry them up, and you'd add usually some kind of meat too if you had it, or
if you did, if you did, even sometimes I guess maybe a little bit of hamburger that had been left over from the previous meal, but she could put together quite a tasty treat.
And even something like hamburger and onions, that was another one.
And she could make gravy. She was a big hand for gravy. It didn't matter what she made, even if she fried liver, it tasted so good. I know Tim did not turned on by that one, but
I did have pork liver. I really liked in the spring, but anyway,
in my opinion, you never had gravy till you had liver gravy. But I don't know if anybody could make it like my mother did. But it was any meat that she cooked, she always seemed to have the homemade gravy, and it was really good.
And certain night of the week, what was Saturday night? Other than bath night, which maybe these two go together, but anyway.
Saturday night was bath night. Everyone had their turn, and it was usually bean night, homemade beans on Saturday night. And most times you could have homemade brown bread, or sometimes she'd make biscuit or homemade rolls, and it was just so good.
For those, a lot of people will know, but brown bread it's basically like white bread, except there's molasses in it too, right?
That's I believe.
Yeah. Oh, and man, didn't she ever? Oh, I have her recipe I got from Carol Ann, my cousin, and we'd make it we have her bread recipe we managed to get too. Yes. Oh man. So what kind of desserts did she make? Because she baked a lot, didn't she?
She did. Yeah. Along with on our family farm, we had a large apple orchard too, so we could pick our apples, and that was really a nice treat. And of course, my mother made apple pie. That was one of her most common pies that we had. So we could pick all of our own apples and make that, and she made that. And once in a while, she'd make a cake. But and of course, the kids was always really fond of chocolate cake. We love chocolate cake. And my father, he was a little different. He was very fussy, and he didn't want anything to do with chocolate cake. So,
no good.
So Mom always had to make a separate cake for him, and it was in those days what we called a white sugar cake, just basically a plain white cake with white frosting, and of course no chocolate for him. So. Of course, all the kids liked the chocolate cake, so that one, of course, disappeared first. And once that was gone, then we would, of course, eventually we'd get into the white cake, and that would go too.
What about jams and jellies or pickles? Did she do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that was really common home there. She'd make homemade jam and any kind of pickles. Of course, we had our garden, so we'd get the cucumbers, and she'd cut them all up and make that. And I had to say my very favorite jam was gooseberry.
I don't know if I've ever had it. What is gooseberry?
And she made jam early on, and then she got the point with the jam. You always had those skins from the gooseberry into it.
Mhm.
And eventually she made it into jelly. So she strained it somehow to eliminate the skins.
Yes.
And it was, I like that even better because you didn't have those skins. But gooseberry jam was my absolute favorite. But she made other ones too. But that was good.
Mark wants to know, he said, it's got a question for you. He says, it's always amazing how as we get older, we appreciate these stories so much more. Did your father's family cook more with cast iron? Because he's thinking about switching over. Did she have cast iron, or did she just make do with what she had?
Yeah, I think she did. I'm not sure if she had that all of her life, like way back. I can't really remember when I was really young, but she always thought that cast iron was good. And I have an older brother who stuck with it. Jim, he swears by the cast iron frying pan, and all the older generation always said that made things taste better. So whether it did or not sure, but her food tasted good, so I guess we'll have to go with that.
What about milk and cream and butter, stuff like that?
Yeah,
you guys?
Yeah, we of course, as I said, we had our own cows, and our father would milk the cows, and occasionally I'd have to take his place if he happened to have a day that he had the flu or was sick or something. But the milk was incredible, and we'd put it in the fridge for overnight. And when it set overnight, of course, it was so rich. We had a nice Jersey cow, and my father always swore that the Jersey cow gave the best milk because it was so rich with cream. And when it set overnight, the cream would all come to the top. And I remember it actually got so thick you couldn't pour it.
Really?
There was about, in the old glass milk bottle, there would be, I would say, about 4 to 6 inches of just thick cream on the top of that. And they would take that off and use that. They like that in their tea or in their cereal and stuff like that. The old people loved that. And my mother would make homemade butter, and that was quite a process. She had a thing there. She would put it in this little metal hopper with a cover on it, and I can't remember all that went into it, but as she made it, like the milk that come off, it was like kind of a sourish milk.
Okay.
And we'd crank it, and then she'd rinse it. And she said, you have to make sure you keep doing that and rinse all that old milk out of it, because she said, if not, it would taste rancid or sour. And so after that process, she'd get it all done and make it up into a nice, neat ball. And she had a little wooden thing that had a press, like a press, and it had a nice fancy little print on the bottom of it, and she'd give that a light press on top just to make it look fancy, I guess.
I don't know why that makes me smile so much. No reason whatsoever, but she wanted her butter to look nice. That was her, I don't know, I don't even know what you'd call it, but I mean, she was a homemaker, and that was her way of just going above and beyond to make it nice for you. Hey?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe she thought it tasted better with that little print on there.
Sometimes they did, So what did you guys do for fun when you were a kid?
Well, we played different games. My sister, she liked hopscotch, but that wasn't really our thing. And of course, they would skip. The girls would skip. And we would play baseball some, and of course we'd hide and seek, and tap was similar to hide and seek. We used to play that, and so anyway, of course, my sister, there was lots of boys in the neighborhood, and my sister just didn't seem to have very many friends because there wasn't a lot of girls around our age, and so she was kind of a loner. And we tried to get her to come play some of the boys' things, and then she would say, "Well, I don't know." She say, I guess I will promise I'll go play baseball, because we needed one more person. And we'd always give her the promise, okay, well, you come play baseball first. And when we're done, she would say, now you got to keep your promise. So we're going to play hopscotch today or skip. And of course, being a boy, that was a sissy thing. We didn't seem to think much of that. So anyway, we'd tell a little fib, and we had to take off. We'd skip out without playing hopscotch. But she caught on to that. And
you guys used to play a lot of road hockey, being Canadian, right?
Yeah. Yes, we did. Yeah.
And you occasionally wouldn't have a ball to play with?
Yeah, we started off playing, and I think if I remember right, we'd play up against the old woodshed, and we start off with an old, I guess it was tennis ball or whatever we had there. And of course, sometimes you know what they're like. You beat them around enough, they would break and crack. And they get so they were no good, and we'd go look around to find another ball, and so anyway, the boys said, "Well, you got to go find something." So we had no ball, so I went up and I opened the door one day to my sister's closet, and I looked down and I seen she had the most beautiful collection of dolls that she valued. I think she liked them even more than she liked her brothers. But anyway, I come up with the ingenious idea, one of those heads off of that doll, she might not miss it. I think that would make a great hockey ball. So I slipped one of those heads off and went down and got together with the boys, and we had a great time. And of course, they wouldn't last forever. The eyeballs would get beat out and the hair would be all ripped apart, and they'd eventually break. And so I would sneak up and I would get another one. Eventually, after a while, she caught on to that. She opened the door one day, and she had a collection of dolls, and about 3 or 4 of them was headless. So, and so I had to answer for that.
Was it another switch? Was it?
Probably. I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing it was probably a switch for that.
So, when you were real young, you guys didn't have TV, did you?
No.
So, what would you have?
Well, we had neighbors who did have TV, and we would go up Saturday nights and sometimes and watch the Beverly Hillbillies and so on. And we did that for a while. And then eventually in, I believe it was 1969, the moon landing was ready to take place, first moon landing. And so anyway, my father, he had quite an interest in that. And so he said, I think I'm going to go in and talk to someone in town. And so anyway, he talked them into renting him a TV. I believe his plan was to keep it for a week. And we were so excited. I mean, this was incredible, like a first moon landing. So we all gathered around and we watched that. And when that was eventually over, we said, Dad, boy, that TV, we really think that's pretty cool. Why don't you see if you could buy one? So he left the TV there and he goes back to town and he talked them into selling it. So if I remember right, I believe it was about $40, and he bought this black and white TV, and that's all that we had, black and white, and it was what we called very snowy. It was just, all you seen was like snow coming down, but it was static, and it wasn't very clear, but we thought it was great because that's the first one that we ever had. And we only had 2 channels, no remote control, everything. You had to walk up to the TV, turn the volume up on one little knob, and it had another bigger knob for channel selection. But like I said, 2 channels, and Saturday night was kind of a squabble because on one channel it was they had what the girls were more interested in. It was they called it Academy Performance. It was a movie of the week, and every Saturday night we called it Academy Performance, and the girls, they all wanted to watch this movie. And of course, it was on the other channel. Living in Canada, it was Hockey Night in Canada. And of course, the boys, they wanted to watch that. So anyway, that was quite an interesting ordeal.
So you told me last night that you actually started, I want to say watching, but following hockey on the radio, did you?
Yes, we did.
So before you had a TV?
Yeah. I remember my father got me into that, and we listened to it. And I remember Gordie Howe and some of the older guys back then on the radio. And we thought that was incredible. So we just couldn't wait till we got to the point where we had a TV that we could actually see it. And it was pretty cool.
So you used to, I like the story you told me earlier too, about when you went down to visit the neighbors. They were pretty energy conscious back then, were they?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, before we got our TV, like I said, we would go up to our neighbors and watch on Saturday night. And they were an elderly couple and retired, and they had a little family farm like we did. And so anyway, they just couldn't see wasting electricity. So we'd sit and watch the Beverly Hillbillies or whatever was on with them. And the house would be in complete blackness. And the elderly lady would sit there with a flashlight on her lap, and occasionally she'd like to check the wall clock and to see what time it was. So she would take her flashlight and she'd shine it on the clock, and she'd say, "Oh, we got about 10 more minutes left on the Beverly Hillbillies." So, but that's the way it was. I mean, no one had a lot of money, so you had to be careful with everything.
And I remember you telling me you found an old electricity bill from when you were first married, did you?
Yeah.
And when did you get married?
We were married in 1976.
And how much was your electricity bill for, was it a month or 2 months?
For 2 months, yeah.
How much was it?
It was, if I remember right, it was somewhere between $12 and $15 for 2 months.
Times have changed.
Yeah, really. I'd like to see that now.
and you said, so, growing up, you didn't have a lot that you could, I mean, you never missed out, but what was it you guys used to get once a year for grading?
Oh yeah. Our grading gift was incredible. We would go out to the it was called in those days Dairy Treat. It was similar to what the Dairy Queen would be today, and we would get a soft ice cream cone for grading. So that was our grading gift, and we thought that was pretty good because we did not see ice cream or anything like that very often.
Isn't that neat? So what about, we talked, maybe last couple of things we'll chat about, but you talked about make and do, always having, what did you guys use to make hinges on the fence doors and things like that?
Yeah, some of the old outbuildings and so on that we had. If we had, we just couldn't afford to go buy hinges or anything like that. So sometimes we'd find an old chunk of a black piece of a mill belt that came from a belt that they ran the mill with, and we'd cut a big square chunk of that out and nail one part of it to the part of the wall and the other part to the door, so it would make it swing. It worked great for a hinge anyway. So.
And you guys would cut your own fence posts?
Yes, I remember going with my father, and we'd go in the woods, and at that time, we cut them about 5 feet long, and we'd bring them all out when we felt we had enough. And then my job was I would hold the fence post across a little stump or chopping block, and my father would turn the power saw on an angle, and he'd make 4 cuts on one end of it, and it would sharpen it up to a point where you could put it in the ground.
And what about and the mallet you guys used? I love that story. What would you use for a mallet, Dad?
Yeah, we used my father had a great big old wooden mallet. It was probably, I don't know, I'm guessing about 10 inches in diameter, a big huge chunk of an apple tree, and that thing lasted forever. Did it have a head on it, or was it? Yeah, that was the big head, about 10 inches across, probably. And they had a hole into it, and you had a big wooden handle, and you could pound forever that thing, and it wouldn't seem to make a dent into it. It was hard as rock, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah. I got a couple more questions for you from other, but one more thing I wanted to get you to touch on. So you said, you guys had most of what you needed when you were a kid, but you talked about the importance of bartering back in the day too. Yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit, Dad, how that used to do that.
It was a great system because we called it the barter system because you didn't have to go to town and buy this or buy that and pay tax on it and so on. Like sometimes we had a little small family farm, and there was fishermen down in the community and so on, and you could either trade product like some meat for some fish or whatever, or you traded your services if someone in the community knew how to do electrical work and you needed it done. There was no charge. You just did it to help each other out. And then if they needed help to build maybe a garage, everyone would get together and do that. And that's it saved a lot of money for everyone, and they got clear taxes too.
I was going to say, yeah. So
the government might not like
if you needed something, you traded for it.
Yes,
and it's no money exchanged hands, so there was no taxes to be paid.
It was great,
and it just sort of worked, eh?
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah.
So Mark says, does your dad think of himself as a prepper or a homesteader, or just a way of life? So you wouldn't, to you, nothing seemed, that was just normal, right?
Yeah, to us, really, and I think to my father, he just considered it a way of life. That was the normal thing to do in those days. It wasn't just us. It was, a lot of other people was in the same boat. So, and like I heard one elderly gentleman say one time, he said, we grew up poor, but we really didn't realize we were poor because we were all in the same boat, if you know what I mean.
Everybody in your community?
Yeah, like you just, so you really didn't feel like you were, but I guess when looking back on it, we probably were, but we didn't know any different because everyone is the same way, right? So
that's I mean, and maybe you were poor with money, but you had what you needed.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, like you got by, and
we did. We had a great family, and like I said, they taught us the value of hard work and honesty. And in the community, you were judged on your word. My father was always big on that. He would say, "Keep your word." He said, if you promise a neighbor you're going to be there at 3:00 to help them do something, you make sure you show up there at 3:00. And I always detested being late for anything, and I guess I got a lot of that from my father. I'd rather be 15 minutes early than 15 minutes late. So I think that's a good thing to live by.
This is a really good question here. Cabot Porter says, there we go. Best memory of childhood other than stealing the doll heads. Now that, I know that puts you on the spot, but I know you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, boy, I don't really. That's a tough one. Probably one of the special things that I do remember was probably from where we lived to where we go to Weymouth. Like on July 1st was really, really big.
That's Canada Day for America.
Yeah, that would be Canada Day. And July 1st, we celebrated that. And a lot of the little towns it was really big. So we would go down. It was probably about a 20 to 30-minute drive to a town. And they start off about 10:00 in the morning would be a huge parade. And that was for us as kids, that was incredible. We would go and we'd sit there. And there was a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into the different floats that was there. And so we thought that was great. And then, of course, they had a big a field there. And they would bring in, they had ox poles, and you'd watch that. And they sold cotton candy and barbecue chicken and you name it, they sold it. And we'd be there all day long. And they had rides like Ferris wheel and the big swing that would go around. And so we spent our whole entire day there doing that because that was a treat, because really all we knew was two things: was school and work. And beyond that, we didn't have a lot of leisure time. And so I would say that was one of the big things that I enjoyed, was July 1st for Canada Day, to go do that. So
that's really neat.
Yeah.
There was a couple of stories I wanted you to share. One, what about, did you guys have phones when you were a kid?
Well, we did eventually. And when we started out, the only color of a phone we had was black. All the phones in our community was black. We had, and they were all wall phones in the beginning, and then eventually they got what they call desk phones. And so anyway, they're rotary. You had the rotary dial. And where I grew up, we were on, I don't know if a lot of you know what this would mean, but we were on what we called a party line. So what it was in the community, there would be 4 or 5 families, and you would all be attached to the same line. So if your neighbor got a phone call, it rang in each one of the houses on this party line. But you had to designate in the different rings. So that's how you knew whether it was a call for you that you would pick up. If it wasn't your ring, you just let it ring and the neighbor would pick it up. But ours was like one, you would get like a one long ring. That was ours. And then someone else would have like 2 long rings. You might have a long and a short ring, and so on. And that's how you would designate the difference between a call for you and a call for your neighbor. And sometimes you could, after you knew your neighbor had picked up and was talking, and you wanted to listen to some juicy conversations, you could pick up if you were careful, and you could listen and get in onto some interesting stuff. You
guys figured out how to, I don't want to say how to run the internet before it was the internet, right? You knew how to play games. So
yeah,
what did you do on occasion, Dad?
Well, I had a buddy that lived up the road, probably a couple miles from where I did, and we went to school together. And we had, our internet was ingenious. We lived on this party line, and so what we would do, we learned in school to play chess, and we thought it was a pretty cool game. So we come up with this genius idea that I would call him up at night after supper, and we would each have our chessboard set up. And on the party line, in a chess game, as you know, that can take quite a while to play. So anyway, we would get going on the chess game, and it would go on and on. Of course, when a neighbor wanted to make a phone call that was on your line, they couldn't call until you hung up. So this game would go on for probably a couple hours. And we had one lady up the road that she got a little bit nasty with us. But anyway, that was our internet back in those days.
So you would tie up the party line for hours on end playing chess, and you'd say like the space that you'd move to, and you'd each have a board, and that's really cool.
Yeah, we knew what it would be, like pawn to whatever one it would be, like queen, knight, 2 spaces or 1 space, whatever. And so I would move it on my board, and then I would tell him what my move was, and he'd move that same one on his board. And
okay. Homestead Glamour Girl says she's pretty sure she remembers a party line in the Doris Day movie she watched in a film class, so she'd heard of it.
Yeah, Doris
and
Day.
Little Klondike says, I remember the party line. And Martinson family said, too long, too short in 1980-81.
Okay.
I remember.
Yeah.
And so Little Klondike had a question for you.
Yeah.
Asked, how bad were the winters, and how did you guys prepare ahead of time during the year?
Yeah. Well, our winters, they seem to be quite a lot worse, in my opinion, I think, back then than they are now. Back then, we definitely got a lot more snow, and we had to help our father shovel. It seemed like every day. And when it turned cold, it would usually turn cold about November, and it stayed cold probably through till, up into April. It wasn't like today, you'd get one cold day, one milder day, and so on. And so everything, shoveling was all by hand. And of course, in those days, we didn't even have the nice light aluminum shovel like they have now. We had another heavier shovel, and of course the snow didn't slide off it as well as it does on the aluminum shovel either. The snow would stick to it, and to prepare for it, well, we had a big old wood furnace. And of course, during the good weather, and before the snow would come, we had to make sure we helped our father get the firewood ready. He would cut it on the woodland, and we'd get it out, and we had to split it. Copper father split it, and our method of splitting the big furnace blocks was we had a big steel wedge. We put that, stand the block up, and we had a big maul, and we would hit the steel wedge and drive that down through the wood. And when we got it all done, eventually we had one window hole there to the old cellar that we would open up, and we all had to go out and give a hand and toss it up, and our father would pile it all up in the old cellar, and we just made sure we got the wood ready before the cold weather hit, and that helped preparation for the winter.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So what about, I wanted you to tell, because things, you guys didn't have a lot of accidents on the farm, but you had a pretty serious one when you were almost an adult, right?
Yeah.
So you guys had graduated from horses to tractors at that point?
Yeah, because my father, it wasn't my father's tractor that it happened on, but we grew up strictly with horses, so that was our equipment. But our neighbor had a tractor, and I was working with him, and we had cut some pulpwood, and we were going to take it down the road, and he told me to jump up on back of the tractor while we went. And anyway, he had a long bolt that was sticking through on the PTO on the back of the tractor, and I jumped up and stood on that, and he just started to hit, and it caught my pant leg, and it pulled my leg down in, and I let a holler out of me, and he had just, thank goodness, just started, and he stopped immediately. And when I looked down, I could see the bottom of my foot was facing up towards me. It had pulled my leg down in and ripped my pants down, but we had to get another fella, and we were parked on a sheet of ice at the time, so we were terrified that it was going to move. So anyway, there was a neighbor there handy, and he heard us, and he come and helped and cut my pants out of there and helped me down off there, and my leg was flopping all over the place, and got me in the hospital and got it all fixed up. And anyway, it turned out pretty good, because it was like very close to losing the leg. So.
You were 17 at the time, right?
Yeah, I was 17.
Yes. I remember you saying the anesthetic did you in pretty good, or you're pretty sick or something from it, were you?
Yeah. Well, back in those days, they used to, when they put you to sleep, it wasn't like today with a needle. They would put some type of a mask over your face when they put you under. And I called it ether. It smelled like some type of ether. It was gross stuff. And they'd spray that in this mask and put you under. And then as soon as you would come to, they had me up and tried to get me on my feet. And I had crutches and so on. And then, of course, they had to get a container, because as soon as you stand up after having surgery from that stuff, all that junk that they pump into you that smells so horrible, you would get sick and bring it back up. So but once you do that, then you felt 100% you were good.
So we've been an hour and 5 minutes, Dad. You've done good. But so let me ask you a question to end up on. Like, everybody always calls them the good old days, hey? Mm-hmm. And do you miss them? Oh, look, hey, I just want to hear Judy, your sister,
yes.
the one that you cut her thumb off, she just says, I remember this. She remembered the story. So she's been in here listening. It's great to have you, Aunt Judy. I haven't seen you in a long time. But everybody says, actually, Mark wants me to ask you this question first. So I said, he wants to know what you think about the divide in Canada. He says, always talk to Canadians about this and seems like media hype. So it was about the question of Canada Day and how you feel, I guess, where the country is now compared to before. I guess maybe you could tell the funny story, because Grampy didn't fight under the Canadian flag when he went to World War II, right?
No, he fought under the Union Jack,
which is our Americans would know as the British flag, right?
Yes.
So and what did he? So we had when they made the new flag, the Prime Minister was Lester B. Pearson, right?
Yes.
And he had a nice nickname for the Canadian flag, didn't he?
Yeah, my father wasn't very happy about it, because as a soldier, he fought to defend our country. And of course, back then, in those days, he fought under the Union Jack, which was the British flag. And when we decided to get our own flag, Pearson, of course, was responsible for it. And my father, he thought that Satan and the Liberals was pretty much on the same level anyway. That's the way the old timers were. They stuck with one party. And anyway, his nickname for the new Canadian flag was Pearson's dish rag. So that's what he called it.
That makes me chuckle. Yeah. So let's end with this one then, Dad. So like I said, they call it the good old days. Mm-hmm. Do you miss them? And were they better? Are things better now or worse now, do you think?
Well, I guess when you can't really, if you're going to go back, then you have to take everything. You can't take some of the good from one and some from the other. So there certainly was a lot of good about it. I think, people learned the part about the hard work and helping neighbors, and all that part was so good. And growing up in the families, I think we were closer. We always ate meals together, and so on, and spent a lot of time together as a family. That part of it, was really good. I guess the bad part was, when you think of the poor women who had scrub clothes on the scrub boards, compared to now, we toss them in the washer, we toss them in the dryer. And so that part of it certainly wasn't the good old days, of course. So, but I guess, it's 50-50. I mean, it certainly, I enjoyed it. I am very glad that I grew up in that day and age. I think it helps you make you the person that you are. And I think, it's important to be able to share these things and pass them on to other people. And the younger generation don't know a whole lot about it, but I found it very interesting to share, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thanks, Dad. I very much appreciate this. This was, I didn't even know if I'd talk you into it. I asked Mom beforehand, and I said, do you think Dad will come on the show? I figured you would. I mean, hey, you conquered, well, not a fear, but you got on a plane and flew out here at 67. I said, hey, why don't we get him on and live stream on the internet and share his stories, right? Yeah. So did you enjoy yourself a bit?
On the show
on here? Yeah.
Once I got going, I admit I was quite nervous leading up to it, because like anything, when for the first time, same as flying on the airplane, that leading up to it, you think about it and you're a little nervous. And once you get into it, like I enjoyed the flight, and I enjoyed this on here with my son Tim, and I'm proud of everything that he's doing here with the show. So,
well, thanks, Dad. I always said, when it's funny when you're 16, 17 years old, you think your dad doesn't know everything, and you wake up one day when you're 23, 24, 25, and you realize your dad knew everything, and now all of a sudden you're like, why didn't I listen when I was younger? So yeah, thank you, Dad. I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I love you.
I enjoyed it. I love you too.
Thanks, guys. So we had this was great. Maybe we'll do another episode in a year or so. If I end up out in Nova Scotia, we'll do one out there. And I loved hearing your stories, Dad. So thank you. But guys, I appreciate it. This was fun. We had a great time. It was very much it was just a really good time. Thanks. We had so many people in here. Thanks to Homestead, Glamour Girl, Little Klondike, Cabot, Porter, Mark, O-Towner, Snail Creek, and a whole bunch more. And thanks, Judy. My Aunt Judy was just in here listening. I appreciate that. I know my Uncle Paul said he was going to. So it's just good. It was pretty neat growing up with a large extended family. Dad ended up having 8 brothers and sisters, and it was Christmases and getting together with all the cousins was always a lot of fun. So anyway, guys, I appreciate you. In the summer, we're all busy, and a whole bunch of you showed up. So thanks for coming and listening to Dad's stories. We had a good time. So as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week. One second, we'll be off here. That'll play. And we'll close this guy. There we go. As soon as that one stops playing, we'll be done.